Barbuda after Irma. What does it mean to you?
I've been working on a project there for a few years.
Yeah, that's Robert De Niro.
It's a wonderful spot that you can't find anymore in the Caribbean.
Paradise Found. That's not the title of a new movie. It's a multi-million-dollar real estate project.
De Niro and his partners leased this site, where an abandoned hotel currently stands. They plan to replace it with a luxury resort. It would be one of just a few large developments anywhere on Barbuda. Paradise Found. It's an example of how, even before the storm, Barbudans struggled to control the path of development on the island. They want jobs, they want some growth, so they welcome the resort, at first. Then, De Niro announced plans to expand the property's footprint, and some Barbudans started worrying. Maybe they were giving up too much. They pushed back, but De Niro had an ally.
I've been treated very well here by the present government.
In the end, the Prime Minister helped De Niro and his partners negotiate for more land, agreeing to rent property about 50% bigger than the original lease. Deals like that, they make a lot of Barbudans worry that the Prime Minister is trying to impose his plan for Barbuda. A few weeks after the storm, Kendra and Asha were trying to organize a protest, or picket. They wanted Barbudans to appreciate how critical this moment is.
So let me just fill you in on what we've done so far. We're going to do a picket. The theme mainly is about this why gas has suddenly brought the whole land tenure system up when we're in a disaster.
So that's the issue. I think the main issue we need to push in this picket is the situation with the land. I already own something. Now you're telling me you have to pay $1 for it? Yeah, how insulting. How insulting.
So paying $1 for a plot of land in the Caribbean, it doesn't actually sound that bad. But for Barbudans, the land system is a defining part of their identity. So the $1 proposal, which would transform that system, it isn't just financial, it's personal. This is Nadia Harris. She's on the council with Kendra and Asha.
Okay, what we need to do as well, right? We can't only plan for just now. We have to look ahead. And that's the most important thing. Barbuda needs us. Whatever it takes to get Barbuda back on its foot, I would be a part of it.
In light of the situation in Barbuda, in which we need to raise about 200 to 250 million US dollars.
Okay, let's pause for one moment. $250 million. That's about 30 times the amount that Barbuda's local council spends every year. The country just doesn't have enough money for rebuilding. So
we have decided to reduce the amount of our NDF program. So for $140,000, a family of 4 could become citizens of Antigua and Barbuda. Again, a limited time offer because we recognize that
in a small island state, we have to become creative. We have to bend over backwards. So, in essence, we are seeking to market Barbuda as a green island. And at the same time, cultural aspects will be respected because we recognize that they provide the island and provide us as a country with a unique selling point.
the Prime Minister visited New York a few weeks after the hurricane. He does this every year to reconnect with the Antiguan and Barbudan diaspora living in the U.S. This year, the big topic was, no surprise,
when it comes to the land issue,
the land.
we are respecting the myth that the land is owned in common by the Barbudans. I don't just say the myth.
We hear about a bigger, better. What is a bigger, better?
How can we ensure that Barbudans are sitting at the table?
We've been living on that land, and that land is ours.
You occupy the land.
We finished. We are not going to give it up.
Okay.
We are going to fight for our land. It is our land.
I hear you.
And we're going to make our land.
But that anger, that fear that the Prime Minister is cutting Barbudans out of the process, it hasn't led to much action. Since the storm, the evacuees are displaced, scattered across Antigua. It's hard to unite, hard to work through their differences, hard to speak in one voice.
Sit flat on the ground.
So the picket that Kendra...
Hello family, and welcome to a new video by the Federation of African Liberation. They call me African Esquire, and I'm here to talk to you about a very important issue. So I've talked multiple times about the issue of neocolonialism and how neocolonialism is really colonialism, but it's really disguised as something productive, something good. You're developing a country, you're helping a country, and you're not really robbing the country of their resources or their land. But that's actually what's happening, and there's not a lot of accountability, because behind the guise of a corporation or behind the guise of an actor or an actress or an activist, we can't necessarily point the finger at the oppression that's happening or the robbing of people's resources and land, because it seems as though something humanitarian is happening and that's something exploitive. And this is exactly what is happening with the Barbuda land grab situation. So I'm going to basically lay this out as methodically as I can. And I'm really going to start with a quote from an article written by Dwayne Omawale, who is the Minister of Information for the Federation of African Liberation. So this is a quote from an article that he wrote, and it says, "Last year, Barbuda was devastated by a hurricane. This was Hurricane Irma. The government wasted no time in taking advantage of this by repealing the Barbuda Land Act, which stipulated that the land in Barbuda was communally owned. Robert De Niro is one of the people who stands to benefit from this. This is why De Niro has taken a leading role in the efforts to rebuild Barbuda. He plans to set up a resort there, and the fact that the Barbudan people are fighting to retain the collective ownership of their land and their communal way of life appears to be of little concern to Mr. De Niro. Those who applauded De Niro for his rant against Trump are equally as unconcerned about the struggles of the Barbudan people. Because, of course, Robert De Niro has the appearance of being someone who was for the rights of people because he is so vocal against Trump. But if you're so concerned about the rights of people, why are you not having a problem with taking away the cooperative rights of people who have had this cooperative right in their land since the 1800s. So briefly, I want to talk about land grabbing. The definition of land grabbing is the buying or selling large pieces of land by domestic or transnational companies, governments, and individuals. Now, the situation in our Barbuda, just to outline it briefly. Basically, Barbuda is a very small island in South America. In 1834, the island was, slavery was abolished, and as a result, the Barbudan people created what is called the Barbudan Land Act. This was a communal act, basically, saying that we're not going to have private ownership on our island. Instead, we're all going to own it as a community. The community is only about 1,500 people. So they have been able to retain ownership cooperatively. Now, in 2017, as many of you know, there was the Hurricane Irma. What many of you might not know is that Barbuda was one of the islands, although it was very overlooked, that was devastated by the hurricane. Now, when the island was devastated by the hurricane, a lot of the people actually had to flee the island in order for safety. In fact, everyone was ordered to evacuate. But during the time where people were still away from the land, the Barbudan government, which has been trying actively to get private ownership in their land, actually passed an amendment which allowed for private ownership of the land. Now, to backtrack a little bit, Robert De Niro and James Packer, some of you might remember him, he was engaged to Mariah Carey. They have a joint business deal for something called the K Club, which essentially was a place that was often visited by Princess Diana. They wanted to make this small resort a big resort, basically, and they offered the Barbudan government $6.2 million in order to create this resort. Now, the deal of $6.2 million would be for a 198-year lease, and they would receive 555 acres of land. This is according to The Intercept, which is a news source. So this is the deal that they wanted. There was a vote that happened in Barbuda. Most of the people who voted did vote yes. However, there was question as to whether or not some of those people actually were residents of Barbuda, or were they people who were foreign people who came to Barbuda to vote, because there's no way to tell in how it was voted on. So it's believed that for the most part, most of the Barbudan people did not want this deal to happen, did not want there to be a resort on their island. So you would think that the resort would the hurricane would halt the resort, but instead, when the hurricane happened and most of the people were no longer in their land, there seems to have been some underhanded dealings that were going on, because all of a sudden the government decided to pass this amendment allowing for private ownership, and now the government is now debating whether or not they're going to not just have private ownership for Barbudan citizens, but whether they're going to open that up to foreign investors. And this, of course, would be a whole nother situation, because most islands inside of the Caribbean, or really any type of resort place with poor people, the people are still very poor, even though they have these resorts that look like they are amazing and it looks like they're bringing in all this money. But as we know, in a neocolonial system, the fact that you're bringing in money doesn't mean that it's going to the poor people. In fact, a lot of that money is just going to a few people on top. We should be very curious as to why the Barbudan Prime Minister has been so anxious to get rid of something that has been inside of his country for over 100 years. Why is it that you're so anxious to get rid of this despite the objections of the people? And the people have been very opposed to this idea of taking their cooperative system from a cooperative and taking it into private land ownership. So this totally violates a lot of rights. And the funny thing about this is that Robert De Niro recently visited the United Nations, and you can look up many articles on it. They're heralding him as being a hero and being someone who is advocating for the rights of people and advocating for Barbuda. This is another quote from The Intercept. They said that to many outsiders, the role that De Niro plays in this period is seemed benign, if not outright heroic. In the weeks after Irma hit, he appeared at the United Nations on cable news, pledging to personally help with Barbuda's reconstruction and urging the governments and international agencies to pony up and aid and stand with the vulnerable. In interviews, De Niro did mention that he had a hotel project in development on the island, but only to explain his particular compassion for the people there. And my question is, we see a lot of humanitarians who have different agendas. It's very interesting that this man is sitting here telling people how much compassion he has for the people of Barbuda, but his answer to that is having a hotel and a resort. Most people who act like they have compassion at least have some type of charity going on or some type of school that they're starting to at least guise it under, we're trying to do something good for the people. Yet this man basically says, I have so much compassion for these vulnerable people who don't want him on the island in the first place, and his stake in the island is a hotel, is a resort, not even something for the people. Because as we know, if these people are poor, and we know that they are poor, that money's not going to go to them. That money's going to go to foreigners that come to the island, and the money that is from that deals with the government, if it's like any other neocolonial regime, that money is going to go not to the people, not trickle down to the people. That money is going to go to the politicians who are going to be enriched through this deal. Now, as I said, it's funny to me that he went to the United Nations, because the United Nations has some rights that they have written into their rights of the Indigenous People Charter, and the United Nations seems to be unaffected by the fact that these people's rights are being taken. I'm just going to list a couple of the rights of the United Nations that are being violated in this system. And according to the United Nations, people have the right to self-determination of indigenous individuals and people, self-determination. So if you have most of the people of an island saying that we don't want to be inside of a capitalist system, we don't want to be in a private property ownership system, we are fine with our collective cooperative system, and you're saying, well, no, this is not good for you, instead you need this, you are completely undermining the people's right to self-determination, and instead you're imposing on them your will. Not only this, the United Nations has the rights of indigenous individuals and people to protect their culture through practices, languages, education, media, and religion. And if you listen to what the Barbudan people are saying, they're not just saying that the communal ownership of our land is an economic system or is a property system, but they're saying this is our culture. They made a conscious decision to enter in this system since they were liberated from slavery. So how dare you, Western governments or Western individual, Western actor, and other neighboring Antigua, how dare you, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, then make the statement that, well, no, we know what's really good for you. Even though you made this decision and this is your culture, we're going to impose our culture on you. Because private property ownership is really a culture. It's the culture of the West. It's not the culture of all people. If you know anything about the United States, you know that before the Native Americans were wiped out by the Europeans, you know that the system that they had and the culture that they had, no one owned the land. That was their culture. So to say that, well, private property, it's in your best interest, no, that's your culture, and you should respect other people's rights to have a culture. Also, inside of the UN rights of indigenous people have a right to their own type of government and political development. So again, if they have their own right to their own governance and economic development, if they have their own right to their own economic development, then why is it that you feel like you can tell them what's good for them? Why is it that you can make deals with politicians and have a hotel come into this land? Why is it that you can decide how the land will be distributed and how the land will go to, who the land will go to, despite the fact that many people don't want this? So again, I'm saying this is all ironic. Once again, Hollywood has proven itself that it's not really interested in the rights of people, and it's certainly not interested in the rights of indigenous people, or they say minorities, but really African people are not the minorities in the world, but the people who are non-European. They say that they have a interest in this right, but if you have an interest in it, you would not be so invested in your own capital gain, and you would understand that when people say we don't want this system, you have to respect their right to say that. You have to respect their right to determine their own destiny. If they're saying, hey, the argument is, well, they don't have certain institutions, they don't have access to this or access to that, they have to get loans. If they're saying that they are willing to forego those institutions they don't have, and they're willing to deal with it and live on their land the way that they want to, then so be it. What is it in America that makes you think that this is so much better? Because from what I've read, there's no one who's homeless in Barbuda, but there's plenty of homeless people in America. I don't know if you think that this system's better that incarcerates people and makes them homeless, but you have no right, you're not in a moral position to have a right to tell someone else that their system is wrong, that your system is right. So that is all I have to say about this. If you are interested in joining the Federation of African Liberation, please visit our Facebook page, look at our website. We have a membership form that you can fill out and be a part of a Pan-Africanist movement that is seeking to change the narrative as far as indigenous people and African people's right to self-determination. So that is all, and I will see you all in another video.